Thank you, Sung, for your wonderful talk. When I saw that you were giving the talk, I realized that through your parents, you have a longer relationship with Zen Master Seung Sahn than any of us here. Uh, my own relationship with him goes back to um, 1978 when he came to Kansas to perform the wedding between myself and Judy Leutman, now Zen Master Hae. Uh, but he had been teaching already in this country for more than a few years, and of course in Korea and Japan much longer than that. So what I decided to do, realizing that is, I pulled up actually an article that I wrote for Lion's Roar, um, which was published shortly after Zen Master Seung Sahn's death. So he died in November of 2015. So it's going on 18 years since he's died. So I think it's important to keep his memory alive. And so before I ask for questions, I'd like to take 10 minutes to read what, what I wrote, which is just about everything I knew about Zen Master Seung Sahn.
Stan, I'm going to
Yes?
interrupt for a sec. I think we're having a hard time hearing you. Could you either turn your audio settings up or speak a little louder?
It's up as far as it'll go. I'll speak louder and
That's better.
closer. Is this better?
Yes, thank you.
So never mind what I just said, uh, except that I am about to read to you my memories of Zen Master Seung Sahn. I remember him best bowing. For years, he rose at 3 a.m. to do 500 prostrations before the regular 108 with the group at morning practice. He was a sturdy figure in his short gray bowing robe. His arms swung freely both on the descent and the ascent. His forehead pressed against the mat for a precise moment before he rocked forward on his hands to rise. Much bowing, your center becomes stronger and stronger. Once, before a retreat I did with him in Boulder, I asked him what he did when he sat. He told me he recited the great Durrani over and over very fast, one repetition per breath. Then your mind is like a washing machine on spin cycle, moving very fast. All the dirty water goes out, but the center is not moving. The great Durrani, or the Durrani of great compassion, is a very long mantra, about 450 syllables. I asked him if he actually pronounced, subvocalizing every syllable. He said he perceived each syllable moment to moment. He was fond of the notion that in Buddhist psychology, moments of perception go by at about the same fraction per second rate that frames of film must be projected in order to create the illusion of motion. He loved movies, especially Western and other action films. Once, during a Koan interview I had with him, he told me, "You must become a Western action hero." He liked the movie E.T. because the children and the alien were so compassionate to each other. But he thought the title character fell short of being a true bodhisattva because he was so preoccupied with going home. He himself was always on the road. By the early 1980s, he had Zen centers dotting the country, several in Europe and Asia. He visited them all regularly. His energy was very strong during the 80s, perhaps due to special practices he did then. Once, when he came to Kansas, he stayed at our house in a downstairs guest room. That night, my wife and I, in bed upstairs, listened to blood-curdling yells coming from his room. When dawn broke, we went downstairs and found him in the kitchen, bags packed and ready to go. Drinking tea, smiling. Many demons attacked last night, but I all drive away. And he explained the various Taoist yells he had used and how the feng shui of our town and the room on the side of the hill under the pine tree attracted demons and restless spirits. My wife, fearing her old teacher had lost his way, said, "Those demons are all in your mind, Sun Zunim." As he opened the car door, he waved his stick and shouted up to her, "Yeah, you are correct, all in the mind, but you must understand this mind." He learned English when he came to this country in 1972, at the age of 40. At the age of 21, he had received Dharma transmission from the brilliant, eccentric Kobang Sunim, and went on to direct temples both in Korea and in Japan. Kobang had told him, "I am the flower, you are the bee. You must spread this teaching throughout the whole world." So in 1972, he landed in Providence, Rhode Island, began living with and teaching a group of Brown University students who had found out that a Zen master was working in the local laundromat. Even though he took English classes at Harvard, his use of the language was always shaped by the directness and urgency of his Zen teaching. What are you? You don't know, so only go straight, don't know. Always, everywhere. This don't know epitomized his style, a masterful use of colloquial English to translate, in this case, the Chinese wuxian, no mind, and bring it to life, manifesting the concept and instilling it rather than explaining it. He taught us to breathe in, what am I? And breathe out, don't know. It became, for many of us, certainly for me, the great question. He was also telling us, just do it, years before Nike picked up the phrase, and don't make anything, and put it all down, and try for 10,000 years nonstop. These were not presented as slogans, but as sincere admonitions, always in the moment, no matter how often repeated. He was a master storyteller and delivered much of his teaching through stories, gesticulating and mugging his way through tall Buddhist tales and becoming in turn a wise old woman, a Manjushri, a stern Namchan killing the cat. Many of these stories can be found in his books, Dropping Ashes on the Buddha, Compass of Zen. But of course, it was his living presence that kept us enthralled. It was not just his energy. There was a dearness about him in everything he did, but especially when he spoke. Interviews with him were warm and clear, water flowing into water, as Barbara Rhodes, Zen Master Seung Sahn, put it. My first retreat with him in 1978 was a 3-day Keto, a chanting retreat, at a house on the coast at Big Sur. I helped him build an altar out of scrap lumber, and he placed on it a beautiful, delicate, ornate golden statue of Kuan Yin. When someone asked him why were we using such an elaborate statue for a retreat instead of a plain Buddha, he replied that Kuan Yin made herself beautiful to help all beings. We followed the standard retreat schedule, early morning until late evening, but instead of sitting, we chanted Kwan Seum Bosal for hours on end, each of us equipped with a percussion instrument, Sun Sanim setting the tempo with a huge moktak. Assigned to clean his room, during one of the breaks I went in and found him not resting, but listening intently to a tape recording of the previous session, moving his lips. His talks during that retreat were all about the bodhisattva of compassion and the spirit of compassion as the heart of Zen practice. When you are thinking, your mind and my mind are different. When you are not thinking, your mind and my mind are the same. That is Zen mind. That is the name for Kwanseum Bosal, great love, great compassion, the great bodhisattva way. He believed in chanting as the easiest form of practice and the best form of together action. His own chanting was like a great bell. It seemed to reverberate directly from his gut into ours. He was absolutely still when he chanted. When he was 21 years old, disenchanted with politics and philosophy, he undertook a 100-day solo retreat in the mountains, chanting with a moktak 20 hours a day, taking cold baths at night, eating only pine needles. At the end of the retreat, he wrote this poem. The road at the bottom of Wangok Mountain is not the present road. The man climbing with his backpack is not a man of the past. Dok, dok. His footsteps transfix past and present. Crows out of a tree. Caw, caw, caw. His diet on that retreat may have given him the diabetes he had to cope with the rest of his life. It did not slow him down. Rather, it was simply another vehicle for his teaching. He always spoke of his body as a rental car, and he would say that when something is ripe, it will soon be rotten. Toward the end of his life, he was given the title De Jongsa, Great Elder Teacher, the highest title bestowed by the Chogyay order. When he was presented with the accoutrements of this position, he said, "This whisk is very heavy." The last time I heard him teach was at a precept ceremony. He always told two stories at precept ceremonies to illustrate the importance of correct direction, knowing when the precepts are open and when they are closed. First, he told the story of Hae Chung, a precepts-keeping monk who would not even uproot grass in order to save his own life, and was made national teacher by the emperor in recognition of his virtue. Then he told the story of Nam Chan killing the cat, a koan that has opened many Zen students' minds. When he came to the part of the story where Joju puts his sandals on his head, he took the brass handbell from the table and he put it on his head. Balancing it there, he looked at the Sangha serenely and said, "So, keep precepts, become great Zen master. Break precepts, become national teacher." He always left us with a question. But when Subong Sunim, his Dharma heir, who died in 1994, asked him, "What is the shortcut to Zen?" He answered, "Not for me." And this was how he lived his life, not for himself, but for all beings. The poem on the precepts certificate reads, "Good and evil have no self-nature. Holy and unholy are empty names. In front of the door is the land of stillness and light. Spring comes. The grass grows by itself." So thank you for listening to my memories of Zen Master Seung Sahn. Do any of you have any memories that you would like to share, or do you have any questions?
I have a quick question. This
Yes.
is Mark.
Mark.
Um, how close was Sansanim to his teacher later in life, and how often did he interact with him?
I really don't know that. And I've wondered myself if anyone has any information on that. I'd like to hear about it. It's a good question. As I said, I've wondered but never actually looked into it that deeply.
Yeah, I have some information on that.
Yeah, go
The
ahead.
question was, how close was Sansanim to his teacher in later life?
That was the question, yeah.
Yeah, this is Musangsanim here. I don't know if you can see me.
Yes, but I recognize your voice right away.
Yes, nice to see you, sir.
Nice to,
Yeah, so Sansanim took care of his teacher in later life. Uh, his, his teacher didn't usually have a temple. He was a freedom style monk. He would wander from temple to temple. But in later life, he stayed at Hwagesa in the northeast corner of Seoul, and Sansanim became the abbot. And basically, he took care of Kobang Sanim, and that was his practice, as I understand.
thank you very much. Very much in character for that to have been his practice. So I hope someone is taking care of you well right now. How are you doing?
I'm fine. You're taking good care of me.
Yeah, good. You're taking good care of me also. You always have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Nancy, I believe you were about to say something.
Yes, I have actually two questions. They're very different. I think I'll start with this one. So, and this is a whole different topic, but we as human beings have this experience often of feeling shame about something that we've done, or many things that we've done. And because of the nature of it, we don't talk about it much. You know, we kind of want to hide it because we're ashamed. And I would love to hear you, if you wish to, talk about how to work with that emotion, that human experience.
Yes, I've had that experience myself, and I've certainly done things which called for a sense of shame in my life. You know, and it depends on what it is that you're ashamed of. Sometimes it might involve another person, and speaking openly about it would be a disservice, perhaps, to that person. Um, in a case like that, it might be wise to speak to a counselor of one sort or another, a person you can trust and who, of course, never divulge what he or she has heard. Many of us here, I think, have had experience with, you know, psychotherapists of one sort or another. And I myself have found certain psychotherapists in the long course of my life and everything that I did that you know, I wouldn't share with everyone. Um, and it's worth looking into, finding someone you know that you can trust and that you feel might really be able to help you. Sometimes it might be a Zen teacher. Uh, just as well might be, you know, someone who's that's simply that person's profession. And you know, you can ask around, ask friends, and usually find someone, I would imagine, no matter where you are, who can help. You can also, of course, and should work on it yourself. Um, it doesn't do any good to shove it down into the very bottom of your subconsciousness, you know, where it can only fester and perhaps cause more harm to you, if not to other people. So um, we have, you know, ceremonies actually for some conditions like this, repentance ceremonies. I have found that to be very valuable. Also, I don't know how many people know about you know, the repentance ceremonies that are um, actually a part of our practice, not a regular part of our practice. I think it would be too bad if we had to have one every week. You know, I hope there's not that much misbehavior going on in the Quantum School of Zen, but you might want to look into repentance ceremonies. I'm sure you can find it on the school's website. And if necessary, you might want to avail yourself of that practice. So those would be my thoughts on what to do with a sense of shame. I think it's good that we have a sense of shame, but if not treated properly, regarded properly, working with it properly, it can be, it can work to your disadvantage and perhaps the disadvantage of others. So thank you for that question. I really appreciate it. Did you have another one? I can't remember now.
I did. It's completely different. But, okay. So you've been in academics for most of your working life and a Zen student. And how do you how have you worked with combining? How does practice help your academic life, your thinking mind that has to be used in academics?
Yes, I have been an academic all of my professional life. We're going to have to update my CV. It's been 7 years since I've been a professor of classics, but I guess I'm professor emeritus of classics now, so good enough, I suppose. Um, yes, you know, my um, academic life began at the same time in a serious way when I first became interested in Zen. That is, I started graduate studies in classical languages in the late 1960s. Um, and that's when I first had some exposure to Zen practice, reading about it, hearing about it, um, and you know, trying to do it with very little guidance and very little success. And it was just 2 years after my first academic appointment, after I received my PhD in 1976, and started teaching at the University of Kansas, that I began practice in, you know, the Quantum School of Zen. So I finally found a teacher through Zen Master Hae, my wife Judy Reutemann, who had been practicing with Zen Master Seung Sahn for a couple of years by then, and who was uh, gracious enough to come and perform our wedding ceremony. Um, so I have managed, so my professional life, I um, publish work has all been translations, mostly of Greek and Roman epic poetry and other kinds of poetry and some other. I was able to combine it with my practice when I, along with someone who really knew Chinese well, translated the Tao Te Ching. And you know the Taoist element in Buddhism, in Zen Buddhism at any rate, is quite strong. Zen Master Seung Sahn used to say, yeah, Taoism and Buddhism get married, have a baby, Zen. Um, so sometimes it's come together. I also translated the Bhagavad Gita, um, which are certainly not Buddhist, but coming from the same cultural sea in India, in which Buddhism also arose, and there are a lot of similarities um, between those early Indian practices and Buddhism. And getting into a text as a translator, you really get into it quite deeply. So, but your question is more general than that, and I think it applies to actually to whatever your profession might be. Any profession that requires thinking, and most professions do require, a lot of thinking. So thinking itself, of course, is not good, not bad. Uh, we are cautioned against overthinking Zen practice. That is, when we actually do Zen meditation, for I'm sure everyone who tries Zen meditation, thoughts are always arising. And I think when your profession, requires a lot of thinking, that's the situation you're in. Even more thoughts are always arising. You're used to thinking and overthinking in any academic profession. But I think that realizing that has, for me, anyone actually helped Zen meditation because it's so obvious. Um, and cut off all thinking, Zen Master Seung Sahn would say, and become one, with your true self. Realize your original nature. You cannot think your way to your original nature. And trying to think your way to original nature will be an obstacle. So I don't really know. I don't have a good answer to how these things have merged in my life. Maybe I've given, I hope, some indication of how they've coexisted, and perhaps being the sort of academic I've been anyway, um, has made it easier for me, in some sense, to cope with thinking. Now, if you ask a mathematician, and I happen to know one very well, that's what Judy's profession was, you might get a completely different answer. And not good, not bad. I don't know. So maybe at some point you can ask her the same question. That would be good. So thank you for your questions. And I see time is almost up. Maybe there's time for one more question if there is one.
I have a quick question if no one else does.
Yes, please.
And this follows along after that a little bit, the sort of don't attach to your thinking and it's not a problem. But I watched a beautiful talk you gave on, that's now on YouTube shortly after a retreat recently, where you talked about Homer and Homer's clear mind
Yeah.
and how brilliant Homer was. And, a trap we often fall into as a Sangha is sort of attaching ourselves to, Zen is special and
Yeah.
enlightenment is special. And could you say something about Homer and his clear mind and his practice and whether or not it fell short and whatever else you might care to about translating his work.
Yes, I have talked about that and written about that. If you wanted to see what I wrote about it, I think it's easy enough to find online. It's called the Odyssey Koan. Uh, the Odyssey Koan, which presents the Odyssey as a koan, kind of the longest statement of case on record as a koan. It's about 12,000 lines long, but you can actually treat it as a koan. So it's been said of Homer that he saw life steadily and he saw it whole. So he did not, flinch from the dark side of human life, of suffering, and of the causes and conditions of suffering. He saw what they were, and he presented them directly. So Homer is a poet who actually achieves, direct presentation. The way we use that phrase in Zen, direct presentation of the human mind, direct presentation of the human condition. And he does it without any kind of judgment implied. He says, here it is. Look at this. And when you read it, and I really recommend reading it out loud. It's a text that originally was oral performance, and it was generations before it was ever transcribed at all, and it continued to be orally performed throughout antiquity. Nobody read books; you always listened in antiquity. And so when I translated it to be performed, to be read out loud. And I have recorded it if you'd like to listen to me read it. It's on Kindle. It's pretty cheap, actually, but some kind of direct experience of the poem, I think, is important. And when you listen to something, you tend not to overthink it. When you read it from a book, you put it down and you say, You don't do that when you're listening to a recording. That's about all I can say right now. Time is up. But if you want to look up the Odyssey Koan, I've said everything that I could say about it, in that paper. So thank you for bringing that up. I really appreciate it. Homer is, of course, very dear to me. Thank you. And thank you, everyone.